Welcome again. If you are joining us, you are here for a question and answer session regarding the MCPS reopening framework. I'm going to provide a little bit of clarity, answer some pre-submitted questions, as well as answer some questions from you in the chat. Ms. Elrosh, since you're here, can I bother you to monitor the waiting room and help me out there?
Yeah, sure.
Thea, I'm going to give you co-hosting privileges as well. With great power comes great responsibility. The answer session regarding the MCPS reopening framework. You're probably hearing me on echo, so I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, a little bit of a delay.
Mr. Mullenhouse, you're on mute.
I was talking to myself. That's probably a good thing. I was saying that we ended the live stream, so I won't hear myself and myself. But if you are listening or watching on YouTube, welcome as well. Hopefully we answer some of your questions this evening. We got a number of folks joining us. We're up over 50. We're going to give it about another minute and we're going to get started. Ms. Strauss, can you give me a thumbs up that you can see the presentation with our little logo? Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure we could. All right. So I've got Ms. Elraj monitoring the waiting room for us. Thea, you're going to be monitoring the chat for us. So I think at that point we have a quorum here and quite a crowd, and we're going to go ahead and get going. So welcome everybody. This is a parent town hall for Ashburton elementary families. We are here to discuss some of the ins and outs of the MCPS Semester 2 reopening framework. We're going to talk about the need for everyone to fill out the parent survey. We're going to talk about what it could possibly look like. There's a lot that's left to be answered, and we're going to talk about why that is the case this evening. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and do some polling. I'm going to try to find out who is here. I'm going to ask 3 questions. The first is, which grade levels are your students in? The second is, have you completed the survey, the parent survey? And the third, and probably the most important for tonight, have all parent guardians activated their parent view accounts? So let's go ahead and launch that polling. If we are in the Zoom, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and keep yourself on mute, but a poll should be popping up in front of you. And go ahead and fill that out. We'll get a feel for who's here with us. If you're a co-host, I don't think you actually get the poll, unfortunately, but I'll share the responses. By the way, don't be shy. You don't have to have your camera off. It is nice to see people every once in a while. Mic's off, camera's on for right now. There we go. One of the few treats we have when we do these types of town halls is I actually get to see people, parents especially. Right. So let's see. I'm going to give it about 10 more seconds. And again, this is just informal polling. It doesn't change anything for the presentation, but it's nice to know who the audience is. And we have actually some really nice balance here. So as you can see, we've got a pretty even split. We have a little bit more of a 5th grade representation than we do a 1st grade representation, but we have a lot of folks joining us today. It looks like about 75% of you have completed the preference survey. So this is still going to be informative to you because I'm going to talk about some more information. Some of you are still waiting, maybe on some more information from me this evening before filling it out. That is perfectly fine. And most importantly, let's see, has everybody done their homework? All right, looks like I'm preaching to the choir tonight. 95% of you have completed your activation of your Parent View account. That is going to be so that you get all of that information that's going to continue to come and has been coming this year. So thank you for engaging with me on that. For those of you that I've not met, I am Mr. Molnals. I'm the principal at Ashburton Elementary School. I've been there for about 6 years working with all of your children, though not under quite the same circumstances as we have been this year. So I'm proud to say that we've got a great group of teachers that have joined us for this evening, that join us each and every day, providing high quality instruction for your students. And we're going to talk about what that could possibly look like in the second semester. Much of what I share with you tonight is information that has already been shared publicly with the Board of Education. What you won't see is Ashburton specific information. And we're going to talk about the why and the timeline for when you will actually hear the Ashburton specific information. So by the end of the town hall tonight, we're going to provide some reminders about the parent survey. The deadline for that is, of course, December the 3rd. We're going to talk about an overview of the implementation process. So what happens after the survey? We're going to talk about answering some of those pre-submitted questions. And I got to say, thank you to those. And many of you did submit questions, and they were really, really good questions. One or two of them, I actually had to go look up the information or contact somebody to get the clarity. So these are really, really great questions to start our town hall with. And then, of course, we're going to provide you the opportunity to ask questions throughout the chat. Thea Jocelyn was actually going to be monitoring the chat for us, and then she's going to pepper me with additional questions at the end here. I'm going to share this presentation with you at the conclusion of our town hall tonight. And the screen that you see right now is going to include some of the resources that I'll talk about briefly, but they're hyperlinks, so you can click right on them. They, of course, are the MCPS Reopening of Schools website, which is your one-stop shop for all the information that's been provided about it. We're going to talk a little bit about health metrics tonight. So if you haven't visited the MCPS coronavirus dashboard, it'll give you a good insight into the metrics they're using to make the decisions and where on a daily basis we stand with that. There's also, when you received the email about the preference survey, you were also provided a parent guide to help you determine some considerations for those learning preferences. And so that's a document that we're going to give you access again to. And then, of course, if you haven't completed the survey, we're going to give you that direct link to the MCPS Family Preference Survey. I do want to make clear that you have to complete the survey for each of your children individually. So it's really important that you go ahead and do that. And if you feel compelled to at the end of the night, after having your questions answered, I'd encourage you to do so. So as I said, during the time we're together tonight, we're going to use the chat to submit questions. Feel free to throw them in there, and Thea's going to distill them for us and then give me some questions here at the end. But I want to get through the main questions that parents pre-submitted. And just so you have an idea of the questions that we're going to start with, we had some parents ask about, what happens once this whole thing starts, whenever it should be. Who's coming back and when are they coming back? And that's a really important consideration for you to have as a parent. So we're going to talk about that. The big one, I think the most popular question I got is, could my child end up with a different teacher or in a different school if we select in person or all virtual? Does our choice impact this? So we're going to talk about that. What will the instructional model be? I'll kind of tease this one out here to say we aren't quite sure yet. And I'm going to talk about what it could look like, but also why we don't know at this exact moment. Parents have asked, I don't want to commit to one or the other. Can we switch after making our initial decision? I'll talk about that as well. Great question about the status of our HVAC system at Ashburton. Happy to answer that one. I have pictures included for that slide. And then the last one was, if we meet certain health metrics or the vaccine is widely available, would we all just come back to business as usual as we were here on March the 12th? And so I'll talk about that as well. So before we get into it, I want to share a little bit of information. But the really key thing here is to understand that every family's decision is uniquely their own. And I have to share that as a principal, I have 2 children in the system, and I have a wife who teaches in the system. Our decision is based on our family. And I know that MCPS is my employer, but family first, and we have to make decisions for our children that we think are in the best interest of our current context and our situation. Every single person's situation, every person's context is different. And so you're going to make the decision that you think is in the best interest of your children. no matter what, they're going to continue to receive a high quality instructional experience with our amazing staff. So just keep that in mind. So you were emailed by MCPS a link to a survey. It's come a couple of times now. And it's a very simple survey. It's called the MCPS Family Preference Survey. And it asks you to enter your child's 6 or 8-digit ID number. Yes, this year we ran out of 6-digit ID numbers, so we tapped into 8. I found that out at our first materials distribution because some of our new parents showed up with extra digits that I'd never seen before. So they educated me that we are now into 8-digit ID numbers. So you're going to put the 6 or the 8. You're going to select the grade that your child's in, and you'll start to type in Ashburton Elementary. If you have children in middle or high school, obviously you can do that for North Bethesda or Walter Johnson. It'll begin to auto-populate. Once it does, just click on Ashburton because it will include the pre-formatted version with the number. The screen is then going to walk you through some of the questions and information that's provided in the parent guide, the 2-page PDF that came along with that survey. Once you go through that, it's going to ask you a simple question. You get one choice. I prefer to have my children remain in the current virtual only learning experience, or I prefer to send my child to school for partial in-school experience. So those are the options. Once you submit, you're also given the option to complete a survey for another child. You're going to submit your completed survey. Now, I have heard and I have witnessed it as a parent that the words that tell you that it's been submitted are very tiny and at the top of the screen. So especially if you're doing it from a cell phone, it could be hard to see. So just double check that you're, after clicking submit, as long as you're seeing the next screen, you should be good to go. All right. So with that in mind, again, December 3rd is the deadline for parents to submit. If you don't submit a survey, you do fall into the category of virtual only. We know that some folks may have thought, okay, well, I'm not going to fill the survey out because I'm going to go virtual only. That works out well, but do know that December 3rd is that cutoff. So please make sure that if you have not done so yet, that you do complete the survey. So in terms of the process overview, there's 2 things happening simultaneously. The first is parents are making their preferences known to the district, and the other is that our teachers, who are going to be the backbone of this shift, are working with the district around their own personal contexts. Some of our teachers have health or other conditions that require us as a system to provide them with accommodations under the Americans for Disabilities Act. There would be circumstances where a teacher would not be able to work in the building because of a health or other condition, and we do have a legal obligation to accommodate that. Some staff who don't meet that criteria may have family circumstances or others where they may have to take leave, either what's called long-term family medical leave or a leave that has been provided by the federal government called the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. There's funding available for people to take leave from their job at a certain rate of pay to cover the needs due to childcare or others. Because a sudden return or a sudden shift could cause the dynamic at somebody's house to change. So there have to be options for our staff. Once we get that information, the survey information, the staff information, principals are working with central, or will be working with central office to determine what the model will look like at their local school. We use the data from our staff, from our parents about how to construct this model, where we know that some are going to want all virtual and some are going to want a hybrid in-person approach. And so I want to be upfront to say, and the superintendent has said this a number of times, it may look different from one school to the next. And we know there's a lot of listservs and message boards, and based on the needs at Garrett Park, it may look different than it does at Ashburton or at Southlake or at Greencastle Elementary, any other place in the county. Every school is going to be challenged to look at the pot of students that they need to support in person and the staffing that they have available, and they're going to have to figure out how to make it work. And we will do that. And then through the months of December and into January, we've already started building preparations for an eventual return, making sure that our classrooms meet or exceed CDC guidelines around social distancing, that there's clear signage in the hallways, that we have storage. We'll talk about this in a little bit here. We'll continue to work with transportation because you are offered the opportunity to opt in for transportation if you click the in-person option. We're then going to have to form classes and assign rooms. We're going to have to provide training for all of our staff. And there will be regular community updates from MCPS as well as myself. And then the board has said, or MCPS presented to the board, that in January, each school would release its plan and its instructional model to the parent community. Those of you that choose in person would then be notified with some specifics, and that would be the plan that we start to move forward with. MCPS is doing a lot in terms of safety. So when any student or teacher comes into the building, there's a lot that we make sure that we have in place for them, including a health questionnaire, a face covering requirement. This would also extend to students. We are limiting access. So everything has been by appointment only. We don't have visitors randomly coming past the front door. We provision hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies. We remind about regular hand washing. Staff have been provided with a training on the 5 pillars of COVID safety by MCPS. When students come back, there won't be supply sharing. I had a bad habit of walking by Miss Lynch's desk a lot to borrow her stapler. I can't do that anymore. And it is a hard habit to break because I often walk out in the office looking for it and have to go back and get my own. But it's going to be the same for students. We're going to have to caution them against supply sharing. There won't be communal supplies, and that will include for any type of art, music, PE, anything like that. There just won't be communal sharing. Principals are going to be offered ongoing support as we figure out how it's going to work in our building. MCPS has issued one-to-one computing devices to all of our students. So way back in marking period 1 and 2, I know that we said we had parents that said, I've got an iPad at home, we prefer that. That's totally fine. But remember that if to do the in-person, you're going to need that MCPS issued Chromebook. And the idea is that that Chromebook goes back and forth with the student, like the textbooks of old. So if you do need that Chromebook reissued, please contact Miss Reese or Miss Locke to make that happen. We're spending a lot of time thinking about storage space, re-envisioning our classroom spaces to make sure that students have ample storage, that teachers have ample storage, and that everything is done in a way that meets the social distancing guidelines. And so this is something that we've shared before. The board has shared it. MCPS, the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services, is looking at particular numbers for when we should be coming back in person. Particularly, they're looking at the 14-day average positivity rate amongst Montgomery County residents. The CDC has a calculation. The state of Maryland has a calculation. This is very different than some of the early school systems who adopted a firm date and said, we're going back on this date, and then had to quickly undo it before they started, or started back and had to quickly pull back because of the rising case numbers. So the metrics in MCPS really are based on the prevalence of COVID-19 in the Montgomery County area. And then once we move from there, we move into the phasing of it. So once we determine that we can start, that we've got about a 14-day positive trend, we're under certain numbers, that's when the actual phasing in of students starts. And so this is one of the resources that I'll be providing you through the presentation. I don't know if you haven't seen this, it's a very interesting thing. Principals check it regularly, but that number in the middle, 28.5, we are looking for that to be around 5 for us to be able to return safely. And if you look to the graph to the right, the one that kind of looks like a roller coaster, that number 5 is where the health department says there's a low risk of transmission of COVID-19. And so what we're asking everybody to do is please wear your masks so we can see the kids back in school, and encourage those around you to do the same. That is one of the first and best things that we know that we can do to make this happen. We also know that we've been on a very, very high level of case rate over the last couple of weeks. It's something that's been increasing as the weather has turned colder and as people have begun to celebrate holidays and seen other gatherings. So hopefully we see that trend turn around quickly and we can be back in the building safe and sound with all of our students soon. So I'm going to jump into the pre-submitted questions, and there's 6 major ones that were asked. I reviewed them, so I want to walk through them briefly to provide the information. And then we're going to start fielding questions from the chat as well. So who's coming back and when? So the board was given an initial draft of the groups, and you'll see group 1, group 2, group 3. We're looking specifically at the green row, which is elementary. And so they're looking, I want to be very clear, the February 1st start date is the first day of the second semester. Since the beginning, MCPS has said the earliest we would come back to any type of in-person learning at large would be the beginning of the second semester, and they have maintained that. There is a small, there's consideration of small groups, mostly discrete special education programs and career and technical education programs who might be able to come back in January if the numbers are trending in the right direction. But the earliest that we would start this phasing in would be February 1st if the numbers, if the metrics, the health metrics have been met. So I know there's some confusion around that. I want to be very clear. February 1st is not the start date for this unless the metrics have been met. I want to be very clear about that. So the decision was made to bring back our kindergarten and our grade 1 students early, along with our specific special education programs. That's going to be the first group that would come. Phases will go about every 2 to 4 weeks as long as the numbers maintain themselves. Group 2 would be pre-kindergarten, grade 2 and grade 3. And then the last group to come in would be grade 4 and grade 5. Some of the logic behind that is some of our older children, our grade 4 and 5 students, are actually helping to manage the online learning of the younger students at home. And so they're being used as a resource and a support, and we want to honor that. If you're interested in the middle and high school numbers, it's middle school 6, 7, 8. High school has a different formula. They want to bring back the older ones earlier because they're closer to graduation and credit-bearing courses. So there's a lot of thought that went into this. And then again, just a reminder that phases may be adjusted based on changing public health conditions and the implementation experience. If numbers should rise suddenly or we need to address it as such, there could be a sudden return to all virtual for everyone until it's safe to come back again. So that's kind of what we're seeing in some other districts around the country. So another big question was, what will the instructional model look like? The answer is we don't quite know yet. We can tell you the possibilities of what it might look like, but it's really going to depend upon the results of that parent survey and our availability of staff. It's also important to understand that depending upon the guidance from the CDC, the state of Maryland, the Department of Health and Human Services, our occupancy is limited in classrooms. And so our classrooms, which could have held 25, 27 children and 2 adults, 3 adults at a time back in March, can only hold 12 to 15 students and maybe 1 to 3 adults, depending upon the number. And so we have to make sure that we're maintaining those numbers as well. The instructional model could look different grade level by grade level, phase by phase, classroom by classroom. It's really going to come down to what those numbers look like. And we're going to determine that in collaboration with MCPS Central Office, working to make sure that we can staff the model appropriately for students and teachers. Some of the models that are being suggested for different spaces, different schools, would be a support model where you'd have children in a classroom. You'd have adults working with them, but the teacher may actually be teaching virtually, depending upon the need there. You might have an ESOL teacher in the room physically, a classroom teacher on the other end virtually, or vice versa. ESOL teachers play into this as well. Specialists obviously are part of this puzzle too. Simultaneous instruction model, and many of you actually asked questions about this, so I want to talk about what it is. Simultaneous instruction model means the teacher is physically in the classroom teaching the students that are there while also teaching students that are online. You can also reverse the staffing of that, but it would be basically that the children that are online are also in person. There are ways that can work. The system has been very clear, though, to make that work. There's a lot of hiring that needs to be done. In the last board vote, they did allocate 1 additional teaching position to every elementary school. We were informed of this last week, so we're excited for the flexibility that gets us. We won't quite know what the need is going to be until we get that preference survey back. And then the direct instructional model is not going to be applicable to Ashburton. That would be students coming to school 5 days a week, working physically in a classroom. These are going to be for discrete special education programs, students who need a lot of additional support, who are working on life skills or need a lot of that hand-over-hand support. And so those are the 3 main models that MCPS is looking at. Obviously, as I shared, the first 2 are likely what you're going to see roll out. But again, a lot of decisions have to be made before that. And so just as an example of what the staffing and the preference data could lead us into, they use this example with the board to say, if I've got 24 students in my grade 1 who said they want to come back, 9 of those students happen to receive ESOL services, and 6 have significant needs in the early literacy diagnostic. Well, to meet the needs of those students, I'm going to need a general ed teacher, an ESOL teacher, probably a para, and a special ed teacher. And so I might employ the support model in that grade level. And at that point, I would have maybe a para working in the classroom in small groups of the students, providing additional reading support. I might have the ESOL teacher in there. I might have the special education teacher in there with the general education teacher teaching virtually. I could have the general education teacher in that room with the ESOL and special ed teacher working virtually, and a para being in there to provide that support as well. And so it may not be that all of those adults are in the room, but all of those adults are needed to be with our children. So we're going to have to balance that again with occupancy limits as well. So that's just one small example of what it could end up looking like. So another big question, and I have to say I appreciate people asking this question and giving me the context for it, because I completely agree with it and understand. The survey and the information indicated that there is a possibility, and that the way they write it is that if you select in person, that you might not have access to the same teacher that your child currently has. That is a possibility. It's also a possibility that if you select all virtual, you might not have access to the same teacher as well. It really depends upon the model, how it's implemented, how we staff it at Ashburton. But I will say that the board and Dr. Smith have made clear that it is a priority to make sure that we have continuity of those relationships. And so we're going to work as hard as we can to make that the reality. I also know that they did talk about the possibility of having people at a different school. I don't believe that that's going to be anything Ashburton has to worry about. My consideration was that if we got an overwhelming number of people, if 900 students said they're coming back in person, I don't know that split over 2 days at the beginning and 2 days at the end of the week with the CDC or the occupancy limits, that we would have been able to fully staff it. And we may have needed to lean on where there were other spaces available. I think the larger, and I don't think that's not happening based on the data we currently have. But what they were also thinking about was smaller schools where, they may not have had large populations of students that you need to come in, reopen an entire building, staff it, do all this extra work, when they may have been able to pair them together. I don't at this point see that Ashburton falls into either of those categories. So I wouldn't ask you all to be worried about that. Could you have a different teacher? That is a distinct possibility. It is not something that we want, but we're going to prioritize it as something that we try to make sure happens. So again, this is really important that people fill out that parent preference survey to give us that information. And also, I want to be clear, and I love some of you said, if I take the survey and say it's all virtual, does that mean Miss So-and-so gets to stay home? I love that you're thinking about that, but that's just not how it works. We appreciate that, but that might work for your circumstance, but there are many families that are going to need the in-person approach once it becomes available. And your selection does not change the individual employee level decisions that have to be made. So again, I do appreciate that. Can we switch after making our initial decision? This is a great question. There's a yes and a no. If you choose in-person learning and then get the school-specific plan in January and say, you know what, I've decided that it's not worth it, the risk, the change to the schedule, you can opt for all virtual at any time for the remainder of the year. If you choose all virtual and you want to go to in-person, that's going to require very unique circumstances, is going to be based on space limitations, and is not a guarantee. So again, that's something that needs to be considered. I would act upon the premise that if you choose all virtual, you're going to stay all virtual for the remainder of the year. But if you do choose the in-person, you could opt for virtual down the road without any problem at all. We would simply do the transition for you. What is the status of the HVAC system at Ashburton? So I know that HVACs are a big topic right now. I do want you all to know, and it's a shame that you haven't gotten to come into the building. We had some lovely, cool, recirculated, filtered air pumping through in the early fall when it was nice and warm out. Ashburton just underwent about a $23.5 million HVAC replacement project. It was a huge undertaking. It created a huge mess. And because of the COVID restrictions over the summer, it took a little bit longer than they expected, but that worked out well because we didn't come back to school. So they, about a month ago, finalized it. They're doing some fine tuning and detail work. But every classroom that's in the older part of the building, the rest of the building already had the new systems, put in place over the last few years. So now the entire building is pumping with really nice recirculated filtered air. And as a bonus, our gym, which nobody can use anyway, now has air conditioning. So I know a lot of parents have been pushing for that for a long time. So hopefully we get back to using that gym at full capacity and run around sweating with Mr. O'Reilly and Mr. Spencer sometime soon. So we are good with the HVAC system. I will also share that MCPS is regularly monitoring HVAC systems and their filter ratings at individual schools. So it is something that the system is definitely keeping an eye on. Another great question, if we meet certain health metrics or the vaccine is widely available, are we just coming back? And the answer is not this year. The plan that's rolling out for semester 2, parents were offered an all virtual option. Nobody's going to be compelled to come back. Right now, for the remainder of the year, we're looking at all virtual or a hybrid in person. Next year has not been discussed yet. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done before that happens. We're focusing on next marking period, next semester, or the remainder of this year for that. So those were the questions that you all pre-submitted. Again, I have to say they were fantastic questions. Thea's been monitoring the chat for us. I haven't even looked at it, but I'm thinking there's probably some other questions that you might want to throw my way. Thea, is that right?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So the slide about the phases of students coming back. The question is, these phases are different from what was previously publicized. Grade 9 was a transition grade and in phase 1. Do you know why that changed?
So let me go back to that. I want to make sure we're looking at the right slide here. Are we talking about this one?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as I know, this is the most recent guidance that's been provided to parents. I can certainly double check if that's not the case. I do know that this is one of the changes that was made because pre-K was moved, and I've been focusing, I'm going to be honest, mostly on the elementary piece. Pre-K was initially part of group 1. It was pre-K, kindergarten, and grade 1, and it was moved to group 2. So I do know that this is an updated version, but I don't know necessarily the logic and rationale behind the secondary, but we can certainly look into it.
And then another question was, can you clarify what special education programs means? Does that include students with IEPs and or 504 plans?
So a 504 is not an IEP, it's not special education. It's a different section under IDEA. But when we're talking about special education, we are talking about students with an IEP. When we're talking about specific special education programs, we don't have specific special education programs at Ashburton. Special education at Ashburton would be included, if you're a kindergarten student with an IEP or a 4th grader with an IEP, you would come back when your grade is assigned to. If you attend a discrete program, the Learning for Independence program, school community-based program, the autism program, we have a lot of these programs at schools around the county, even within our cluster. Some of them could start coming back as early as January, and more of them could come back as part of group 1. This is also where you might see some of the early childhood PEP programs starting to come back because those are students that need that direct instruction that we talked about earlier.
Great. And then we've got, if you choose in-person, can you delay your in-person decision until later in the spring if you're not comfortable sending your child back to school when MCPS initially sends them back?
So that is another great question, and I'm going to say I don't have the answer. My understanding would be that if you're telling me in person, we're creating a space, we're staffing a classroom, we're routing transportation, things like that. But we do know that things change. And so certainly if you selected in person and right up into the day it started, you said you wanted to do in person, then something would change. We would work with you at the school level. In terms of a delay, I can certainly ask that question, in the long run. But I would say if you're thinking about that, I would go ahead and select the in-person option anyway, just so that you have the option to delay if you do.
Then would kids be required to get the vaccine in order to return?
I have not heard that they would. There's a lot of law that oversees that, and I don't think that has been a point of discussion quite yet. At this point, the answer is no. I do know that there are, questions around would we simply do, regular questionnaires with students? What steps would we put into place to make sure that, students aren't being sent to school with temperatures, things like that. But I've not heard from the system that we're going to be standing at the front door with a temperature gun or anything like that. So we're going to see how that goes. But I know that there is a work group that's working on those health procedures.
Will they consider if you have siblings in the same school, for example, twins, to be on the same schedule if they're in person?
Yeah, so the we in that equation is probably going to be me. And I will say that definitely. Okay. We did that over the summer. We did a lot of really unique things with the way that we brought our kids back to school this year. We reached out to every family of twins and said, we know this is a really unique situation for you. We are definitely going to be working with you again, either virtually or in person. I think we're going to have to figure out what that looks like, what you're thinking around the preferred options for your family are, and then we're going to work with you as an individual to figure out what makes the most sense.
And then why is the county asking for parent input before the teacher input is known? It's difficult to make a decision when there isn't information about the education model.
So yeah, I've heard that, and it's difficult because we don't quite know what we're looking for. I think that what they've learned is that when they've gone parents first and staff second, or staff first, parents second, we tend to box ourselves in. And we know that as a system, to make this work, we have to maintain flexibility. So right now, staff have been told the expectation is that when called upon to do so, all staff are expected to come back to the building to work in person. Now, that doesn't mean they will. That doesn't even mean they could, because we have to talk about space limitations and other things. I can't have a staff of 100 people in a building if I've got an overwhelming need for students to be in person as well. And that's why Dr. Smith has said very clearly that what it looks like at Ashburton is going to be different than what it looks like at Brookhaven or at Wingate. It's going to be based upon the needs of the community. So right now, this is really a needs assessment on both sides. What does the community need in terms of in-person learning, and what do staff need in terms of accommodations to make it work?
Okay. The questionnaire mentioned transportation. Is that something that affects if the student can get in-person education?
I don't believe so. I know that there was a question that asked if you needed it. Buses have limitations on spaces. I think the numbers they're running now have a student in about every other seat, which reduces the capacity of a bus. I want to say it's I met with the transportation lead, and I believe they were looking at low teens, single digits or double digits. So we're not talking a lot of kids on buses. We know that already they're going to have to route buses continuously. When we talk about the model, it may not be an exact start for every student at 9 o'clock. We may have to kind of stagger some start times. And again, we'll work with families on that. We're going to have to see what it looks like. And actually, I may have glossed over a slide. Oh no, I didn't. One of the things that we're looking at is, when the model comes down to it, the sample that they're providing has, a cohort going on Monday and Tuesday. Everybody's virtual on Wednesday, and then a different cohort building on Thursday and Friday. So this isn't going to be 5 days of in-person instruction for some students. It's going to be a combination, and that's that hybrid piece. So we want to be clear about that as well. In terms of schedules and other things, those haven't been determined, but I would use that as a rough estimate of what it's going to look like.
I got lost. Hold on. Okay.
That's all right.
There's been a lot of questions coming in the last few minutes, which is great. Similar to that question about a delay, would a student who is in person be able to attend virtually for a few weeks if needed due to family needs in the spring?
Again, I don't speak on behalf of the system in those matters, but I think we would work with a family in that situation. I know that there would be circumstances where, let's say that there's a sibling in a grade 1 class and there's a sibling in a grade 3 class, and maybe the parent prefers that they start at the same time. I think that's the most logical example of a delay. It has not been discussed, but it's certainly something I'm going to look into. But I think there are circumstances where we would work with families on that.
Okay, and then what's the plan for getting 5th graders ready for middle school, as in terms of class selection and other preparations, such as seeing North Bethesda?
So I don't know that we're going to take a physical tour of North Bethesda. I think there are some creative ways that we might be able to make that happen. But so those of you that have 5th graders this year, or have had 5th graders in the past, well, there's a lot of processes that we go through starting around the midpoint of the year, where we look at our students, their performance, their needs. We work with the middle school counselors. We work with the programming over the middle schools, and then we do course selection. So that work will have to continue. I think there may be some changes to the approach just to account for the difference in learning last year, this year, and moving into the next year. So we'll make sure that that's something Ms. Strauss and Ms. Gillespie are really on top of. Ms. Strauss is working with 5th grade this year. So, that's definitely something that she'll be communicating about as it becomes available. I know she's already done that with some of the magnet program offerings, I believe, that have already started that. I think the process actually ended already. So those things could continue moving into the next year.
And will siblings in different grades, not just twins, be on the same in-person school schedule?
So that was kind of the example I used, and I could see a logic and a rationale to make that happen. So as I said, we will be working with families. What MCPS has made clear, and the board reiterated, is that a lot of this work is going to come from the principal, and we're going to have a tremendous amount of support to make it work. I know this community, I know what the needs are. We definitely want to continue to work in support of our families. So we will do everything we can in that regard.
Okay. Some studies show that some students are not learning in the distance learning model. Are there any changes to the curriculum being considered to account for that loss?
That may be a topic for another discussion. I know we continually relook at the curriculum and the content. The Office of Curriculum and Instructional Program provides weekly updates to our teachers on alterations, changes to the curriculum to account for the difference in style. As we've learned, we've gotten better. I get the information in weekly updates. Miss Elraj, who's here with us, Miss Rubin, they then take that information, distill it, work with our staff. They're regularly in planning. So that work is definitely continuing and will have to continue in the second semester when and if we start to roll back in person.
Okay, and then a question that the questioner admits likely impacts few families, but wanted to ask anyway. Would the RDCA Learning Hub continue if hybrid becomes operational for families that selected it?
First off, I love that somebody brought that up. Second off, I want that to impact more of our families. So let me jump on the soapbox here. We've been sending out information about the availability of Equity Hubs. Equity Hubs is a grant-based program that is being offered in Montgomery County, and we've taken the steps with Ms. Strauss, Ms. Gillespie, our staff at Ashburton to make it a reality and to partner with RDCA. We are working through the process to be able to open up more space right now for students to be able to come to get in-person support with the distance learning. They would be provided with meals. It is a mostly free program for those that qualify. It is definitely available. And what we have heard is that, yes, that will continue. So it is scenario I'll play out for you. If your child is in the Equity Hub and they decide that we're going to come back for in-person learning, they could decide 2 days a week I'm going down the hall to this classroom, and the other 3 days a week I'm still working at the Equity Hub virtually. A parent may also decide, you know what, I want my child to just stay in the Equity Hub 5 days a week in the building. Absolutely. If you are at all interested in the Equity Hub, we've been sending the information out, apply for it. You're not committing to anything at that point. It just gets you in the door. And actually, it spells out what the need is at Ashburton. So we've been taking the steps with RDCA. They are fantastic partners. And we're very interested in expanding this offering.
Oh, okay. If we pick in person and we aren't comfortable sending our kids back when the time comes, is it a one-time decline, or does our hybrid status stay in effect until we say so? Or do we lose the in-person option if we don't send them right away?
So it's a great question. My reading of it would be that if you start in person and say, this isn't working for us, we want all virtual, we would have to opt you over, because it could cause us to have to change teachers, courses, whatever the case is, not courses, but schedules, things like that, to actually make it work. So my recommendation would be, if you're making that change, then we're going to make that change. We don't want to kind of back and forth, because every time you do that, it may cause us to have to change some other things. They also did say, and they should give us more clarity on this, but there would be unique circumstances where, maybe there's a family that started all virtual but needs the in-person, and we're able to provide that for whatever reason, because suddenly there was an opening because the family left the in-person. We would want to backfill that if there was a need, a circumstance that allowed for that. So I would say, if you make that decision, you've made that decision.
Okay, and then what are the protocols for in-person classes if a COVID positive situation arises, either with a teacher, student, or someone close to the teacher or student?
So they are working through a contact tracing protocol. We have a very clear and robust one for employees. They're working on that, and they will be working on. That's part of the development of this, with the community. So I would say at this point, more information is to come on that. Staff already know kind of what our process is, how we inform. Principals have certain letters for certain situations, and there's a certain approach we take depending upon what the contact tracing tells us. So that is something obviously we would share with the community once we got more information on that.
And that is it from the chat.
Wow. 15 minutes remaining. These are great questions.
Oh, we got a new one.
There we go. Keep it coming.
Has MCPS considered changing the health metrics?
So the only indication I saw about any change to the health metrics was that if there was a certain trend for the groups in January, they might be able to start them earlier. That was in an 8-point font, italicized with 2 asterisks at the bottom of a slide. So I don't even know where it stands with that. But at this point, I don't believe that there's any discussion around changing the metrics. I think some of that conversation would lie with the Department of Health and Human Services as well.
And then who's qualified for equity hubs?
So I'm going to look over Ms. Strauss. I know she's joining kind of just to decide, but my understanding of it is that pretty much anyone who needs it would be available. It would be accessible to.
Is it financial need or educational needs like IEPs, et cetera?
So no, there's no, if you are this, then you get it. No, it's actually open to any student.
Can the state choose to override those MCPS metrics?
Nothing surprises me politically over the last 9 to 10 months. I don't know that would happen. I think that, that's where it's local decision making. We certainly have to comply with what Maryland requires us to comply with. And the plan that's been submitted is in compliance with what the state of Maryland expects. So I don't believe that they would provide an override for anything like that.
So to confirm, I'm sorry, I think there might be a typo in this question. To confirm, MCPS will be reopened business as normal at all in 2021 or only hybrid?
I'm not in a position to answer that. I wish I could. I think we are focused right now on the remainder of this year. And I will say that there are already things that are, preparations underway for things like summer school offerings and other things as we prepare for the next year. So it's not a conversation that hasn't happened yet. It's just been an ongoing one. I just don't know where it stands right now. And I'll probably learn at the same time many of you will.
And just to confirm, the hub is currently active in Ashburton, is that correct?
So yes, so the hub itself, so we've had RDCA. The hub itself allows for us to bring in cohorts of students, but there's a backwards approach to it. Whereas to open a daycare place, you need a full cohort. If it's 13 kids, I need 13 kids. The Equity Hub flips that and says, if you've got 11 spaces occupied, you have 2 free, we're going to go ahead and call those Equity Hub spaces. We're going to fill those. And if we have another student show up, that's number 14, we're going to open up a whole new cohort in the room next door. So we've been working with RDCA, I should say they've been really working with their staff to provide the staffing for it, to secure the funding. It's an application process they have to go through. The key is that it has to be a licensed child care provider, that which RDCA is. So we are working really closely with them as quickly as we can to get that up. If you are interested, you should apply for it because that gives the county the indication of what's available. And there might be spaces at other locations that are already available to you.
And are there similar hubs available at the middle or high school level?
I believe this was elementary schools. I'm seeing Ms. Strauss shake her head. Any input on that?
They said that there could be priority for 6th graders related to a sibling in an elementary school.
There you have it.
What is the capacity going to be allowed for in-person instruction per the MCPS guidelines at Ashburton?
So that's going to depend upon the classrooms themselves. Most of them are standard square footage. We're going to have to walk through that. I will say the public service team this week is actually working through prepping the rooms with some furniture. We'll have support from central office where we go through, but it could be, the ballpark I've been hearing is 12 to 15 people, students plus staff in any given classroom. Now, if I have a smaller room, it might reduce that slightly. Some of those of you that have been at Ashburton for many years know that we have some oddly configured spaces. Obviously, we're going to prioritize the ones that provide us with the most space for social distancing. So that's not yet been determined, but is on my radar, and it's something I get to have fun with. Yes.
Are the hubs going to affect the in-person learning capacity?
No, the county has been clear that once we start this process, you won't have 19 hubs in the building. And I think in one case, in one school, they were able to open, I think 6 because we're Stedwick Elementary, down in Gaithersburg. But I think they're limiting the number of hubs to somewhere in the range of 3 to 4. Based on our projections, we would have the space to maintain that. So we don't have concerns about that. And that certainly would not impact, if your child wants to come to in-person learning, we're going to do everything we can to make that space available for them.
And then how is MCPS allowing hubs at the schools and allowing people in the building, but saying it is not safe to bring kids back to school? What's the rationale for that?
Because the rules around childcare, just like the rules around restaurants, are different than the rules around schools right now. So I know that it's often confusing how many people can go to church versus how many can ride the bus versus how many can congregate outside or go to Thanksgiving dinner at grandma's house. The numbers that have been flying around, we actually asked this question, and the answer was that there are just different rules for the childcare programs right now. And we actually asked about the occupancy limits, around childcare programs as well. And they said that, they have state guidelines that they follow because, again, they're state regulated. So that's why they're able to go by that too. So it's another great question.
Will clear dividers be installed between students in the classrooms?
So at this point, I've not heard that's the case. I will say that they are prepping model schools. There's one elementary, one middle, and one high school in each of our areas, which is our internal structure, for a total of 9 model schools. Principals will be going to visit these schools. In my mind, it's like going to IKEA. I'm going to be walking the building, following the arrows that they've nicely put down and kind of looking at the way that they've modeled furniture and signage and things like that. And then we receive training and development. We come back to our building and we make adjustments as we can, because each building is so different. Some of these have the nice wide hallways. Some have hallways that might have to be converted to one way only, this, that, and the other thing. So I have not heard about clear plastic dividers, but again, I'm not the one that makes those decisions. That's not an Ashburton decision. That's going to be something that MCPS would decide, but I've not heard of that yet.
Will information on the important dates be posted on the AES page or a recording of the video?
So we're going to continue to send information out via our connected messages. And again, if you've activated your Parent View account, you should be receiving those messages. We'll be putting that information on our website, including a link to this presentation here if you want to revisit it. But yes, we've continually provided communications and updates. We may have to have another opportunity like this to answer and ask questions, because I really do like this approach to it, rather than some sort of FAQ email, because we want to get to the nuance and the level of individual families. So look for more information coming around that. As soon as we get information and start that prep and implementation process, we'll be in touch.
And then you might want to go back to the slide that mentioned this, but that hybrid students might be with different teachers at Ashburton, but may also be placed at different schools.
Yeah, so again, my understanding is that the different schools may not be something that actually impacts Ashburton. I don't believe we're a small enough school or with a small enough request for in-person learning that we would need to partner with another school per se for transportation or other reasons. It is a possibility, no matter which option is chosen, that you could end up with a different teacher. The easiest example I give you is, if a teacher is required to come into the building and they decide to take leave, they're not available to me. Or if a teacher needs to be accommodated in an all virtual sense because they have an ADA accommodation, and they're not the teacher that's going to be able to work with your child if they're in person or if they're virtual. We just have to think flexibly. I will say that, we are going to work to ensure that continuity with teachers, but this is going to be quite a puzzle. And we're going to do everything we can that's in the best interest of our kids and our staff.
And then do you have an estimate for the percentage of parents choosing in-person learning at Ashburton?
I don't have a percentage. I know that we had a high number of people that haven't completed the survey yet. So some of you may have actually received a call from a bus driver. The MCPS bus depot has been providing us with support, just reminding folks of the importance of completing that survey by December 3rd. Principals get, the information we have is only around the people who haven't completed the survey. So I have the names and the contact numbers of those who haven't completed it. So we will soon get the rest of that information, because that's going to fall upon us to start planning. I don't have a hard percentage that I could give you.
Okay. Given the high prevalence of asymptomatic cases, how will Ashburton determine if there's a substantial or meaningful excess of community spread due to school reopening? Is there a plan for routine testing for surveillance and management within the Ashburton community?
So that's a great question. I will again say that I don't have the information regarding what that looks like. Obviously, that would be communicated as a part of the specific plan that we would have to provide. those decisions would be made at the central office level regarding testing requirements, things like that. So I would say more information to come on that. And again, if this is something that's of concern to you and you're thinking about the in-person learning, my recommendation would be, given that December 3rd is the deadline for this, go ahead and choose the in-person. Once you get more information, if you withdraw from that's absolutely your right to do so.
One parent says they received a call today, but were told everyone was getting a call, not just those who didn't complete the survey. Is there a way to check and find out if their submission went through?
You can contact the main office if you receive. So let me tell you it this way. If you did the survey on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, the numbers ran again actually even up to Sunday, and got a call. It means that you probably filled it out one of those days. The list hadn't been updated. We updated the list as of this morning. So we get an updated list about every 2 days. So there's sometimes a lag, but the majority of folks on that list probably hadn't completed the survey at that time.
Has there been any discussion of how flu or colds will be treated when a student is in person?
So, in terms of, our health protocols in those regards really don't change. Right? So if your child is sick, we don't want them coming to school. We're going to have to work with the Department of Health and Human Services, who oversees our nursing staff, because I'm sure they're going to have their own protocols and approaches to handling that. So, that's something that we're going to, have to look into further with our nursing staff as well.
What are you seeing in terms of grades and test scores at Ashburton? Are they up, down, or the same?
So it's interesting. I think we're seeing grades in a pretty typical fashion. I think what we're seeing more of is not a grading issue, but it's sometimes an engagement issue. So students who aren't turning in assignments, that were graded, and so there's a lot more missing grades I think that we've seen before. Which could be an indication that there are things going on in households that are, we're having difficulties reaching to the families. I will say that Miss Reese oversees our student well-being team, and that's a question we regularly ask ourselves. I know that question may have been driven by the article coming out of Fairfax County regarding the number of Fs being given to middle and high school students. And I think what's interesting about that is it actually, there's one side that wants to use that as an indictment of online learning. There's another side that says that this actually may be something that we need to look further into. So I'm not seeing significant changes. I will, except in the area of missing assignments. And that's where we've been trying to work with families to get work completed. The part of that is also a product of this is a new system and a new approach. I'll admit readily that I want to say that Monday professional day, I had to sit with my kindergarten son because he had 8 reading assignments that I thought we had submitted, and we didn't click submit. And so I'm not immune to that as anybody else is. And he showed me how to do it and everything like that. We just didn't click the right button. So we got them in on time, I will tell you that. And I will know better for the second marking period. Let me be clear about that too. I learned my lesson. How about 1 or 2 more, and then we'll call it at 7.
Okay, I've got 2 more here right now. So if you select in person on the survey and then change your mind and choose to go virtual, how do you make that change?
So it's an interesting question. I've been asking myself that too, because eventually I'm going to have a master list. And I'm wondering if, and again, this is my wondering because it just hasn't been given to principals quite yet, but if when we release that plan and the specifics in January, if that's another opportunity for a parent to opt out of the in-person at that point. I would assume that there's a step before we get started where that's going to be a possibility. And in all honesty, that may be our staff following up with the families that select in person just to do some sort of confirmation with them, because that impacts my ability to staff as well. So that's something I've got to pay attention to.
Okay, and then our final question of the evening. How do Ashburton teachers feel about returning versus staying hybrid? Do you have a pulse on where they're leaning?
I don't have a pulse. I think there are definitely, I will tell you, there are definitely some who have concerns about it. Those are the folks that are impacted by health and other situations. I know that there are some on the staff that feel that, that it's a step in the right direction for the kids that need it the most. So I think you're gonna find pulses that go up and they go down. I think at this point we've been clear with staff. They really need to consider themselves first. One of the things I've cautioned our staff against is, and those of you that have been a part of the community for a long time know this, we have a really committed staff, and they want to do everything they can to support our students. And I love them to death for that. But I also, given everything that's been going on, have been really, really advising them to make sure that they're taking care of themselves and making decisions that are in the best interest of themselves and their families as well. I guess we'll see when the staffing information starts to come out, and then I have to put it together with the preference survey. But I think depending upon who you talk to, you'll find different responses. But I do know that there are some staff that are, still have a lot of questions. And we've been trying to provide information along the way to help ease that. All right. So it is 7:01. I think we hit it exactly. I really want to thank Via. That was awesome moderating. We did a town hall like this at the very beginning transition. She was a phenomenal moderator. I tried to go solo on my second town hall. I didn't like the feel of it. It felt more like a college lecture. So we brought her back, and I'm going to say we're going to have to bring her back in the future. So Thea, thank you very much for moderating. Thank you to all the parents for submitting your questions ahead and giving me time to seek out some information. Certainly there will be more information and communications coming from MCPS. So everybody, please stay tuned. Please make sure you complete that survey by December the 3rd. And if you have not done so, please activate your Parent View account. If you need information on how to do either one of those things, simply contact the office. We are going to do everything we can to support all of our staff, students, and families through this. This is a great community, and I know that you all are going to support us as well. 7:02, have a phenomenal rest of your evening, whatever you're getting into, and we wish you the best for the rest of this week. Have a great evening.